Radio TV phono nut here, and we have a Newcomb solid-state classroom record player from probably the early to mid-70s with a rather unusual problem. It has the noise that you hear here in the background. That doesn't sound exactly like a 120-cycle filter hum, and we also have no audio. And with the volume turned down, we still have the noise. So let's open this up, try to figure out what's going on with it. Well, this could be what the problem is. Somehow or another the amplifier board got broken, and yeah, ought to be fun trying to epoxy that back together. And this speaker is pretty rusty. Makes me wonder what kind of environment this was kept in. And this must be one of Newcomb's cheaper record players. It uses an integrated circuit-based amplifier. That's a first. So hopefully we can epoxy this board back together and jump her out the traces and get it working again. And I can tell you this speaker is a replacement because the original would have been riveted to this spring-mounted mounting board here. Well, on a good note, at least it's a clean break. So as far as how this happened, who knows? It could have got banged in shipping, or it could have been sabotage. You know, there's some of these schools that when they discard stuff, they can't stand the thought of anybody else using it, so they'll open it up and do something catastrophic to it before they throw it out to make sure can't anybody use it. But this one will get used again, I can tell you that. It may look a little sloppy, but it will get used again. Just to make it easier, get this board out, and the only wires we had to unsolder were the ones from the phono pickup. The rest of these just plug in, and I've already made note of which ones go where for reassembly purpose. Alright, the way I generally do this is determine the correct length of wire that we're going to need to make the jump. And then I strip back the insulation, tin the wire, bend it back into a hook, and then I desolder the connection to be soldered to, slip the wire hook over it, and try to crimp it down as best I can, and then resolder it. Alright, this is what I've done so far. I super glued the board back together because the super glue is quick drying, and that will hold it together for right now. And then I ran our 3 jumper wires from point A to point B, there, and there. And then just as an added touch, I put a little super glue down to hold the wires in place to make sure they don't move. And then I have scraped a little bit off of the circuit board there and there on the component side. And I'm going to, if I can squeeze enough out of my tubes of JB Weld, I'm about out. I'm going to put a little epoxy there, and that can't be seen from the bottom side of the board, and that'll kind of give it a little bit of extra support. Now, one thing you never do, and I've seen this done before, there was a TV repairman in town, and he was unscrupulous to say the least. And I once saw a TV that he had worked on, it had been dropped, and the circuit board was cracked around the flyback transformer, and he didn't do anything but scrape the foil down to the copper, so the copper was exposed, and then he just blopped solder across the crack. Didn't try to glue or epoxy or use any kind of adhesive to hold the board in place. He just blopped solder across the cracks, and of course that held together for about a second. So yeah, if you have to repair a cracked board, you know, you need to physically put it back together with preferably epoxy and be neat with it, and then run your wires from point A to point B. Also making sure to be neat with that. Don't make the wires any longer than possible, because like in this case with an audio amplifier, having wires that are too long, that could cause noise pickup and such things as that we don't want. And then like I did here, probably best to glue the wires in place to make sure they can't move or get snagged on something or anything like that. You want them to remain secure. Yeah, I see the name of Ruth stamped on this circuit board, so Ruth was probably our dutiful inspector who inspected these during final assembly. But yeah, Newcomb stuff, I've always liked Newcomb stuff. Even the lower end Newcomb stuff seemed to perform well, and even though this is an IC based amplifier, it seems to be more to it than your average integrated circuit based cheapy low end school phonograph. Alright, here's the schematic diagram. I have the screen magnification turned off so we can get the whole thing in the shot, but even though this is an IC based amp, like I already said, it's a little bit better design than your average bottom of the line off-brand cheapo classroom record player with an integrated circuit based amp. But Newcomb wasn't off-brand cheapo crap. You know, they had their budget models, but most of their stuff was decent, and as you can tell, this one has a little bit more circuitry to it, is in a loudness compensated volume control and some tone control circuitry, so it won't have a lot of power, but it should still sound decent. And with that efficient speaker, which by the way is a Qualm replacement that I think probably needs to be replaced again, it should still sound decent. Alright, now let's see what takes place. Alright, it's working, but I can tell you that speaker is going to sound like crap. That speaker is rattling like crazy. Of course, the drive mechanism is going to need service too, but that's another chapter. And yeah, that speaker voice coil is dragging like crazy. Given the overall condition of this speaker, I'd probably be better off just to replace it. And as you can see, someone jake leg mounted it in place, so we're going to have to try to do a better job of that with our replacement. Alright, I have the speaker in place and bolted like it should be. Only difference, this speaker did not have the standard quick connect terminals, so I had to hard solder the leads to the speaker. I guess I could have carefully removed the terminals from the old speaker and put it on this one, but obviously I didn't think about it until after the fact. Still got a little hum here. It sounds like 120 hertz hum, so we may have a cap that's failing that we need to check, but let's see. And as it turns out, that speaker's got a bit of a rattle, so we may have to find something else after all. And then go back to the quick connect terminals. But yeah, it sounds pretty good. As far as this 79T cartridge, I think the output is just slightly lower than an 89T, and the tracking pressure is slightly lower. The VM site has them, but he does not have the variety with a 78 tip on the other side. All he has is dual LP tips in both diamond and sapphire varieties. I don't know what's on this side. I haven't checked it yet. And I did a comparative between LP side and what would normally be the 78 side, and they both sound the same as far as the elevated surface noise. So this one here is also a dual LP tip, so no 78s on this one unless I can get lucky and find a 79 that has a 3mm tip on the other side, or replace the cartridge with something that does have a 78 tip on the other side. And this down here is my official Crosley toolbox. Formerly this was a Crosley CR49 record player, which was one of the better. I mean, I use that term loosely, but was one of the better ceramic cartridge equipped portable record players that they offered. Well, I won't bore you with all the drama, but it's one I've been trying to sell locally on Facebook for the past 6 months and getting nothing but flake no-shows, and people want something perfect for $2 and scammers, lots of scammers. So I just finally got pissed off, ripped the guts out of it, saved what few parts I could use, threw the rest in the trash, and kept the case for a toolbox. Alright, we're back together for right now because it's getting to be about dark and I don't want to leave this torn apart. So even though we have the cracked amplifier board fixed, we still have several things we need to address. Number one, this speaker's got a bit of a rattle, so I need to look at that and see if I can repair it, and if I can't, I'll just find another one. I still need to do the drive mechanism. It appears that whenever I turn the unit off, it does not disengage the idler wheel, and it should. And then it'll also need the general cleaning and lubrication that all of these get. Seem to have a little bit of 120 cycle hum in the audio. It's mainly present with the volume control turned down, so we want to look into that. That may be just normal for this amplifier, but I want to check it over and make sure. And then we need to glue this pad back down on the platter. At least this one is still nice and pliable. Some of these I run into, especially the older ones, are cracked and dry rotted. And then of course we need to clean the cabinet up, and I think it'll look pretty decent. But yeah, I've been collecting these classroom phonographs for years, but this is a new one on me. Before now, I have not seen one a Newcomb that used an integrated circuit amplifier. Oh yeah, that speaker's rattling like crazy. But yeah, oddly enough, there was only 3 connections that had to be patched on that board, because the section that still remained on the intact up here, all that was on that was the volume and tone controls and the supporting components for those. So really all you had your signal coming out of these controls to the main amp, and then you had 2 ground wires, and that was it. Now what Newcomb should have done, and I don't know why they didn't, but they should have done this, is they should have had a standoff like right here, at least one here. Better to have one on each end of the board, and then have those 2 corners of the board bolted to the motor board here, and then that would give it some support to make sure it didn't get cracked or broken or whatever in the event of a hard knock. But yeah, something like this fixed up and working properly would be a much better alternative to a Crosley or Victrola or any other one of the Chinese knockoffs that's made today. And they talk about how these older ones like this destroy records. Well, they're probably not as destructive, or certainly no more destructive than anything you can buy today with a ceramic cartridge in it. In fact, I think people get too carried away with that. No, something like this is not going to be as gentle as, say, a Technics 1200 with a properly installed magnetic cartridge, but it's not going to tear your records up after 4 plays if everything's in proper working order. I mean, you know, who's caught? Alright, I pulled the platter off, obviously, to see about the pause control, and actually it does appear to be retracting the idler like it's supposed to be, but the idler was a bit stiff on this shaft here, so we're going to clean that up real good. The idler surface was a little slick, so I used some sandpaper to work on that some. Technically, this whole thing needs to be taken apart and cleaned, but I think for now I can get it to work reasonably well. Alright, I did a quick and dirty repair here, put a drop of oil on the spindle, took the idler wheel out, cleaned it up with some sandpaper, put a drop of, cleaned the shaft and the inner bushing of the wheel there, and put a drop of oil on that, put a drop of oil on the motor bushing, clean the inner rim of the turntable, and ready to put it back together and see what happens. Alright, let's see where we are. Well, that's not too bad sounding at all as long as we keep the volume down. This is a man's world. That pause control needs to be adjusted. Man's world. But it would be nothing. Yep. So I guess the next time we revisit this, we need to check the caps in that amplifier, address the speaker again, and do a few other things, and then this thing ought to be good to go. Let's see what this sticker says. To protect your equipment and warranty, do not assume anything. It's good advice. You know what happens when you assume. Make an ass out of you and me. Please read all instructions before operating. Muner Electronic Supply Incorporated. And there's the address and phone number. So I take it this is either where this was purchased from or they serviced it at some point in time. I hope they're not the ones that did the hacked up speaker install though. Okay, looking at this schematic a little closer, seeing what's going on, this is our cartridge here, and then we have connected to the hot side of the cartridge 180 k ohm resistor, and then on the other end of that resistor is a .001 cap to ground. That's a EQ network, and then we have this 1.2 meg resistor also connected to one side of the hot side of the cartridge, and then the other end of that resistor connected to our 0047 tone capacitor, which connects to the high end of the tone control, and then the low end of the tone control connects to over here between this network, between the 180K and the .001 cartridge EQ network. And in the center of the tone control connects to ground, with the high side of the tone control being our signal out, which goes into the top of the volume control. Bottom of the volume control goes to ground, and then we have this loudness compensation tap on the volume control, which, as you can see, connects to a 68K resistor, and then at the other end of that resistor a .005 cap to ground here. The purpose of that loudness compensation is to emphasize the lower frequencies with the volume control at a lower setting, which will provide a richer tone quality with lower volume settings. And then our wiper, the center of the volume control, that's our signal out through this, coupled through this .003 cap to the base of Q1. And then the emitter of Q1 is our signal output going up here to, through a .05 cap to .2 of this, pin 2 of this IC. That's our signal input, with pin 6 here going to ground. So we have this emitter follower stage here that was, its purpose is probably as a buffer stage for impedance matching. And then we have pin 1, which is a bypass pin with a 5 microfarad cap from there to ground. And our collector of that transistor is also connected to that pin. I think this LM380N is the same chip. It's a very common chip that you can still get. It was used in the 1970s talking book record players. And I want to say I ran into one time where this 5 microfarad cap was open, and it just killed amplification, and in this star pin there's a note on the schematic that tells you what all the pins are that are grounded on that IC that connect to a heat sink. And then pin 14 is our B plus pin, and our B plus is provided from a secondary winding on this motor and then rectified and filtered by this bridge rectifier network and this filter capacitor. And if this filter cap is weak, that could cause hum. And then coming out of the IC, what is this, pin 8, we have a resistor 3.3 in series with a 0.1 cap to ground, and then we have our speaker coupling cap, which is an oddball size, 430 microfarad. If that were leaky, I could see that causing some hum in the audio. So there's really only 3 electrolytics in this set, and they're probably just going to get changed. And I've had some issues with some of the capacitors that they use in these mid-70s Newcombs that were either leaky or dried out. And I noticed those capacitors were made in Mexico. I don't know who they sourced them from, but I'm sure they're past their service life by now. Something else I noticed on my record player, there's a resistor across the headphone/external speaker jack that is not shown on the schematic. I feel like that resistor was a later add-on to make the record player more suitable for headphone operation, to pad down the signal. Originally, normally these school record players didn't have the resistor across the headphone jack because you were normally either plugging them into a headphone listening station that needed the full power to drive it, and each headphone had an individual volume control on it, or they figured you'd just be plugging the record player into an external 12-inch full-range speaker. So I figure the resistor was probably added later, so the record player would be more suitable for just a conventional single headset without an independent volume control. So yeah, there you go. But yeah, I've seen this LM chip on a lot of cheapy record players, but those generally didn't have the impedance matching buffer stage or the loudness compensated volume control or none of this EQ circuitry. Just had a straight volume control and a tone control, and that was it. It's the reason they didn't sound as good as your better designed amplifiers. And I think this chip is good for about 2.5 watts a channel, something like that. And through a good efficient speaker, that would get plenty loud enough for most classroom use. Alright, back on the Newcomb, and I scraped the traces back here, and here, all on this ground trace. We scraped back the insulation, got it down to the copper, got it nice and shiny, and I jumped solder across each one of these points. Now, do not rely on that as your sole means of stabilizing a circuit board, but I just decided to go ahead and do that just for good measure. In this case, we have our circuit board super glued, JB welded, and we have our connecting wires super glued in place where they can't move, and then we have solder bridged across these 4 spots here. So I don't think we have to worry about this board breaking, at least not in that spot again. We still have the hum we need to contend with, so I'm going to pull the board back out and we're going to check the electrolytic capacitors, and hopefully that'll take care of the issue. Alright, we have all of the capacitors replaced, and a couple of them I had to parallel because I didn't have the correct capacitance values and a high enough voltage rating. That's what you have to do sometimes. But one thing I'm concerned about, this bypass cap on pin 1 of the IC, they had a, what did they have in here? That's not it. Where is it? Wasn't it 140 microfarad, I believe, but the schematic calls for 10 microfarad. And even though the hum has actually 145 microfarad, and the schematic calls for 10. So I don't know if that was an update or if somebody just put the wrong value in there by error from the factory. The hum is better, but we've still got a little hum, and I'm wondering if putting a 4 back in there, or a 4.7 would help that any. Alright, about the only difference I see with going back to a 4 is we have a pretty pronounced pop now when we turn it on. The hum level is about the same. And with the 150 microfarad, we just have a brief hum at turn on. So I may just go back to the 150. That could have been a circuit revision, only they didn't give us an updated schematic, so I think I will go back to the 150. Alright, I've just completed the cleaning and lubrication of the drive mechanism. I didn't bother to show all that because I've done it numerous times in the past, and nothing has changed since the last time, so no need in showing the process again. But we took the spindle out and cleaned that and re-lubricated it with this super lube stuff here, along with a little drop of oil dropped in with it, which I use Zoom Spout turbine oil. We took the mechanism apart, cleaned everything, put some super lube on the sliding parts, cleaned the idler wheel, gave it the sandpaper treatment, put a drop of oil on the idler wheel shaft, took the motor apart, cleaned that, lubricated it, cleaned the inner rim of the turntable, and we're now ready to reassemble it, and hopefully we'll have a fully working phonograph. Alright, there we go. And we have good tonal range.
Green-eyed lady, lovely lady.
Now this doesn't have the power or quite as good a tonal quality as some of the higher end models, but it's better, a lot better. Like I said earlier, it's better than your average cheapy IC based phono amplifier.
Green-eyed lady, passion lady.
Now this thing will distort if you turn it too loud, but that's just the way it is with these, but it still gets plenty loud enough before noticeable distortion starts taking place. Obviously this is an LP that we're playing here, and it sounds nice. Better than any Crosley, which it wouldn't take much to be better than a Crosley. Here's the pause control. So it's working, which is not something I would normally use, but it's handy to have just in case. But like I said, really can't play a 78 on this satisfactorily because this is a dual LP cartridge, and the 79s that I'm finding, none of them have a 78 tip. So if I would have wanted to play 78s on this, I would have to change the cartridge to something else. Alright, well I guess that's about all I've got for this. Hope you got something out of it, and more to come later on down the road. Alright, I need to make a quick correction. I had my head up my rear end whenever I was talking about that little bypass capacitor. I erroneously mentioned that the schematic said 10 microfarad, and then I mentioned 4 microfarad. Well, actually the schematic said 4 microfarad, but there was 145 microfarad, such an odd value, installed in that slot. And figuring that it might be a manufacturing error, I put a 4.7 microfarad in there. It did not get rid of the hum. but instead, when you turn the record player on, there was a pretty pronounced momentary speaker pop, whereas with the 145 microfarad, or whatever it was, we just had a momentary loud hum for about a second, and then the hum decreased to a more manageable level. So I just wanted to clear that up so you wouldn't wonder what was going on there, why I said 10 microfarad on the schematic and then I installed a 4 and all this. It's just because I had my head up my rear end and wasn't thinking straight.